Writing is a process. Now that may seem like it's obvious, but it's not obvious to everybody. If you ask most people, what is writing? They'll tell you, well, it's sitting down in front of a computer or sitting down in front of an empty page and putting words on the screen or putting words on the page. But that's actually drafting, and drafting is just one stage in a bigger process. There are several things that happen before drafting, which we'll call pre-writing, and several things that have to happen after drafting that we'll call rewriting. So drafting is not writing. It's just one stage in a larger process. Broadly, it consists of 6 stages. The first 2, which we're going to call pre-writing, are planning and research. Planning is where we identify the task, the purpose for writing. We identify the audience and what are their wants and needs, what do they already know, and we come up with a writing plan to accomplish the purpose and provide value to the audience. The second stage in pre-writing is research. That's when we go out and we find the facts and the data and the quotes that are going to serve as the evidence for the claims that we make in our writing. The third stage is drafting, and that's when we actually get to work putting words on the paper. Again, this is what most people think of as writing, but unless you do the planning and the research before you get into drafting, you're going to struggle to produce a coherent, well-supported paper. Now, the difference between weak writers and strong writers really happens after drafting. The difference is that weak writers go from drafting directly to proofreading. What this ends up producing is a first draft where the ideas aren't very well developed, and the grammar might be okay and the spelling might be okay because we've done proofreading, but the ideas just aren't there. Neither is the organization or the clarity. To get the organization, clarity, and indeed the ideas where we want them to be, we need to go into rewriting. Rewriting is what strong writers do after the work of the first draft, and it includes 2 stages. The first one is revising. In revising, we're going to focus on the big ideas and the big parts of the paper. In other words, is the structure of the paper sound? Do the ideas progress in a logical order? And have I organized those ideas in coherent paragraphs? Once we've done that, we can move on to editing, which focuses on small stuff. So we're going to look at our word choice and our sentence structure to make sure that our writing is clear and easy to understand for the reader. It's only after we've done these activities, revising and editing, that we can move on to proofreading, which essentially involves making sure that our grammar, spelling, and mechanics are correct. And from there, we can submit our writing or publish it for our audience. Now, there are 2 important things to note about the writing process. The first one is that the process is not linear. In other words, it's perfectly normal and understandable to have to go backwards in the process and repeat some steps. This most often happens during the early stages of revision. Once we've done our research and produce a draft and we start to revise it, it's very normal to discover that the ideas that we've come up with in our draft aren't very strong or are incomplete or don't support our main claim at all. In that case, we have to go back to the research and we may have to do some additional drafting. Now, if you're not expecting this, it can seem very frustrating, like taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But strong writers realize that this is perfectly normal. It's part of the writing process. Why? Because writing is not separate from thinking. Writing is thinking. Early in the revising process, we're using it to strengthen our ideas and to make sure that we can move on to editing with a strong, well-structured essay. So if you're drafting and then revising and you find yourself going back to earlier stages in the process, don't worry. It's perfectly normal. It means you're a writer. The second key point about the writing process is that rewriting is crucial. In fact, rewriting is the secret to writing well. Why is that? Well, all writers, whether they're strong or weak, produce terrible first drafts. So if you've ever produced a terrible first draft, take heart, you're not alone, everybody does it. But the difference between strong and weak writers is that weak writers move right to proofreading. They update the grammar, make sure that the spelling is right, and then they submit that terrible first draft. And although the grammar, spelling, and mechanics may be good, the organization, the clarity, even the substance is probably weak. Strong writers, on the other hand, rewrite. They revise those drafts to make sure that the structure and the organization is sound. They go back and research and update their arguments and their evidence, and they edit to make sure that their sentences, their words are as clear as can be so that the writing is easy to read and understand. That's why the secret to writing well is rewriting. It's what weak writers don't do, and it's what strong writers do. So the key takeaway then is that writing isn't just drafting. That's just putting words on paper or typing words on the screen. Drafting is part of a larger process of writing. You know, a lot of times as professional writers, we're given checklists of what good writing looks like, but unfortunately, that doesn't really help us because we have to understand the process that it takes to produce that writing. We've discussed that process in this video, and you can put that process to work to produce effective professional writing.